The autumn winds whispered through Virginia City as Sheriff Matthew Harris stood at the edge of the churning Missouri River, watching dark clouds gather over the distant mountains. His weathered hands traced the strange markings carved into a bleached buffalo skull, a warning sign left by Morning Star, the aging Blackfoot shaman who had visited town 3 days prior. The old medicine man's words still echoed in Matthew's mind. The valley holds ancient spirits, and they do not welcome those who seek the yellow metal with greed in their hearts. Matthew had served as sheriff for 15 years, maintaining peace in this bustling river trading post where steamboats brought supplies and prospectors seeking fortune in the newly discovered gold deposits. But something felt different now. An unnatural stillness that made even the most hardened frontiersman uneasy. His daughter Hannah, who possessed an uncanny sensitivity to things others couldn't perceive, had been having disturbing dreams since the gold strike was announced. The Lewis family had made the first discovery. John Lewis and his brothers found rich deposits in Thunder Valley just as winter was approaching. Word spread quickly, and now hundreds of miners were pouring in despite Morningstar's dire predictions. John's wife, Rebecca, had confided in Matthew that her husband had changed since finding the gold, becoming paranoid, speaking of shadowy figures watching from the tree line at night. At the trading post owned by Michael Wright, Matthew found the usual crowd of rivermen and miners gathered around the pot-bellied stove. But today, their typical boisterous mood was subdued. Michael's young son Andrew sat in the corner, obsessively drawing the same strange symbol over and over. Curved lines radiating from a central spiral, matching the pattern on the buffalo skull Matthew had found. "Sheriff Harris," called David Young, the town's doctor, as Matthew entered. "We need to talk about what happened at the Lewis claim last night." The doctor's face was grave as he described how 3 miners had gone mad, babbling about ghostly drums and lights dancing above the valley. They were now locked in the jail, but their ravings about ancient guardians and broken treaties had unnerved the whole town. Victoria King, the widow who ran the boarding house, joined their conversation with worried eyes. "It's not just the miners, Matthew. My guests report hearing chanting at night, though there are no Indian camps for miles. And Hannah, she told me this morning about her latest dream. She saw the river running red while thunder shook the mountains." Matthew felt a chill despite the store's warmth. Grace Wright, Michael's wife, brought coffee and spoke in hushed tones about changes in her son's behavior. "Andrew's drawings, they're exactly like the petroglyphs in Thunder Cave. But he's never been there, never seen them. And last night I found him sleepwalking, trying to head toward the valley. When I woke him, he said the spirits were calling him." As if summoned by their discussion, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. Matthew moved to the window, watching as unnatural green lightning flickered through the storm clouds gathering above Thunder Valley. The Missouri's waters had taken on a reddish tint, just as Hannah had dreamed. Morning Star's warnings suddenly seemed far more than mere superstition. Abigail Young, the doctor's wife, and the town's schoolteacher rushed into the trading post with alarming news. The children, they're all drawing the same symbols, speaking words in a language none of them should know. And John Lewis? His brothers found him this morning at their claim, carving those marks into his own skin. The room fell silent save for the rising wind outside. Matthew knew he had to act before things got worse. As sheriff, the town's safety was his responsibility. But this threat wasn't something he could face with a badge and gun. He needed to understand what ancient power they had awakened, and why it seemed to be targeting the children and those who had first discovered the gold. The answers, he suspected, lay in Thunder Cave, where Morning Star had warned the boundary between worlds was growing dangerously thin. The storm intensified as Matthew prepared to ride out. Hannah begged to accompany him, insisting her dreams were showing her something important about the cave. Though it went against his protective instincts, Matthew knew his daughter's gift might be crucial in understanding what they faced. Together they mounted up, heading toward Thunder Valley as lightning painted the sky in otherworldly hues. Behind them, Virginia City seemed to hold its breath. The mighty Missouri churned with increasing violence, its waters now the color of blood. On the trading post porch, young Andrew Wright continued his drawing, his small hand moving as if guided by an unseen force. The ancient symbols spread across the page like a spider's web, telling a story of broken promises and awakened guardians that demanded a terrible price for the valley's gold. As Matthew and Hannah rode through the darkening valley, the wind carried whispers that seemed more than natural, Their horses grew increasingly skittish, tossing their heads and fighting the reins as they approached the looming entrance of Thunder Cave. Hannah's fingers traced invisible patterns in the air, her eyes distant as she interpreted the signs that only she could see, just as her grandmother had taught her before passing. The trading post's bell tolled behind them, its sound distorted by the storm. 3 rings, then silence, then 5 more in quick succession. Matthew recognized the pattern from his days as sheriff. It was the old warning signal, one he hadn't heard in 15 years. Something was happening back in Virginia City, but they couldn't turn back now. The cave's entrance beckoned, dark and forbidding, against the purple-black sky. "Father," Hannah whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind, "the river spirits are angry. I can feel them churning beneath the earth." She pointed to where the Missouri's waters disappeared into a series of underground channels beneath Thunder Cave. The rocky ground trembled beneath their horses' hooves, a deep vibration that seemed to resonate with the thunder overhead. Matthew dismounted, helping Hannah down before securing their horses to a sturdy oak. He'd known John, the current sheriff, would send riders after them soon enough, especially after the bell's warning. But what they sought couldn't wait for official sanctions or reinforcements. The curse was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, and Rebecca's last letter had warned of worse to come if they didn't act quickly. Inside the cave, their lantern light revealed ancient pictographs that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Hannah moved forward with purpose, her hand trailing along the cave wall as if reading a story written in stone. "These aren't just Blackfoot markings," she murmured. "There's something older here, something that was ancient when Morning Star's people first came to the valley." The deeper they ventured, the more the air grew thick with an odd metallic taste. Matthew's silver pocket watch had stopped working, its hands spinning wildly before freezing in place. He thought of David, the assayer who'd first discovered the gold vein, now confined to his bed in Virginia City, raving about shadows that moved against the sun and voices that spoke from empty rooms. A distant sound echoed through the cave system, part melody, part keening wail. Hannah froze, her eyes wide. "That's Grace's voice," she said, referring to the trader's wife who'd disappeared 3 days ago after walking into the Missouri, claiming she heard singing from beneath the waters. The sound grew closer, accompanied by the soft padding of footsteps that seemed to come from all directions at once. Matthew drew his revolver, though instinct told him it would be useless against whatever approached. The cave walls pulsed with a faint bluish light that hadn't been there moments before. Hannah began to sway, speaking words in a language Matthew had never heard before. Yet somehow he understood their meaning. The boundary falls. The guardians rise. The price must be paid. Water began seeping through the cave floor, not the muddy brown of the Missouri, but clear as crystal and cold as winter frost. The liquid moved against gravity, running upward along the walls in intricate patterns that matched the symbols young Andrew had been drawing. Matthew realized with growing dread that they weren't just witnessing the curse. They were standing at its source, where the very fabric of the natural world had begun to unravel. Hannah gripped her father's arm with unexpected strength. "We need to reach the heart chamber," she said, her voice carrying an authority beyond her years. The gold they found, it wasn't just metal, it was a seal, keeping something contained. When they broke it, she didn't need to finish the thought. The increasing tremors and the growing chorus of otherworldly voices told them what they needed to know. As they pressed deeper into the cave system, Matthew thought of Victoria's warnings at the last town council meeting. The old medicine woman had tried to tell them all what would happen if they continued to mine the cursed gold. Now her predictions were coming true one by one, and the Missouri's bloodied waters were just the beginning of what promised to be a long night of reckoning. The old trading post near Virginia City hummed with nervous energy as Sheriff Matthew Harris studied the growing crowd. Through the dusty windows, he watched townsfolk gather around John Lewis, the local banker who'd been raving about golden rocks in his drinking water for 3 days straight. Lewis's once pristine suit was now mud-stained and torn, his eyes wild as he clutched a jar of murky river water, claiming he could see fortunes swirling within. Rebecca Young, the trading post owner's daughter, approached the sheriff with worry creasing her brow. "Sheriff Harris, Mr. Lewis hasn't slept or eaten proper since Sunday. Says the river's calling to him, just like the others." She twisted her apron between calloused fingers, glancing at the dozen other townspeople who'd reported similar visions over the past week. The curse that old Joseph Blackfoot had warned them about weighed heavily on Matthew's mind. The ancient shaman had appeared at the town council meeting last month, speaking of sacred waters and vengeful spirits awakened by the gold mining operations along the Missouri River. Most had dismissed him as a superstitious old man, but now Matthew wasn't so sure. David Wright, the town's most successful prospector, burst through the trading post doors, his face ashen. "Sheriff, you need to see this. The river, it's turning black upstream near the new mining camp." The words sent a chill through the room, as everyone remembered Joseph's prophecy about the waters running dark with the tears of betrayed spirits. Grace Harris, Matthew's wife of 15 years, had been documenting the strange occurrences in her journal. A schoolteacher with a scientific mind, she'd noticed patterns in the madness affecting their community. The afflicted all shared one thing in common. They'd invested in the new mining operation that had torn up the sacred valley despite the warnings. The situation grew more dire as Andrew King, the mining company's representative, was found wandering the riverbank at dawn, babbling about golden serpents rising from the depths. His clothes were soaked, and in his pockets they found handfuls of ordinary river rocks he insisted were pure gold. The man's sudden break from reality shook the town's remaining skeptics. Victoria Lewis, John's wife, sought out Matthew in tears, describing how her husband had tried to drink straight from the river despite the mysterious black contamination. "He says the spirits are singing to him, Sheriff. Says they're promising him riches beyond imagination if he'll just join them beneath the surface." Her words echoed the fate of 3 miners who'd drowned the previous week. The trading post became a makeshift crisis center as more affected townspeople arrived. Hannah Wright, the doctor's wife, helped Grace tend to those showing signs of the river madness. The 2 women noticed that touching the water seemed to accelerate the affliction, yet the miners couldn't resist its pull. Michael Young, Rebecca's father, shared disturbing news from his latest supply run to Santa Fe. Similar occurrences were being reported all along the river trading routes, but only in places where mining operations had desecrated sacred grounds. The pattern was too specific to be coincidence, yet too widespread to stop. Matthew found himself torn between his duties as sheriff and his growing conviction that Joseph Blackfoot had been right. The old shaman's words about balance and respect haunted him as he watched his community unravel. The gold fever that had gripped Virginia City was transforming into something far more sinister. Abigail King, the representative's daughter, arrived from Laredo with unsettling documents she'd discovered in her father's office. The mining company had known about similar incidents in other territories but had buried the reports to protect their investments. The curse, it seemed, had a pattern of following their operations. The river's strange behavior intensified as sunset approached. Those gathered at the trading post watched in horror as the waters began to glow with an otherworldly light. The afflicted townspeople grew more agitated, drawn to the shoreline like moths to flame. Matthew knew he had to act quickly before more lives were lost to whatever force they'd awakened. Grace's research revealed that the valley had been a sacred site for generations of Blackfoot shamans, who performed rituals to maintain harmony between the physical and spirit worlds. The mining operations hadn't just desecrated sacred ground. They'd broken an ancient seal that had contained something far more dangerous than mere curses. As night fell over Virginia City, the trading post became a fortress against growing chaos. Matthew organized the unaffected townspeople into patrols, trying to prevent the afflicted from reaching the river. But with each passing hour, more succumbed to the siren song of the corrupted waters, and the line between sanity and madness grew increasingly thin. Grace's hands trembled as she turned another brittle page in the leather-bound journal she'd discovered hidden beneath the trading post's floorboards. The yellowed pages contained detailed accounts from a Blackfoot elder who had witnessed the sealing ritual nearly a century ago. According to the writings, the valley's waters served as a gateway between worlds, and the sacred ceremonies maintained barriers that kept malevolent spirits at bay. The gold deposits that had drawn so many settlers were more than mere mineral wealth. They were part of an intricate network of natural barriers. Matthew stood at the window, watching the eerie lights dance across the river's surface like ghostly auroras. The afflicted townspeople had grown more organized in their attempts to reach the water, working together to probe weaknesses in the patrol lines. He'd already lost 3 good men trying to prevent people from diving into the contaminated flow. The sheriff's weathered face bore deep lines of exhaustion as he considered their dwindling options. Victoria burst through the door, her usual composed demeanor shattered by urgency. The mining camp at the North Bend. They've broken through to a new chamber. The foreman, Michael, he's reporting strange symbols carved into the rock walls. The miners are starting to act peculiar, just like the others. Her words carried the weight of yet another front opening in their battle against the spreading madness. In the corner, Andrew worked feverishly to transcribe Grace's translations of the journal, mapping the locations of other sacred sites mentioned in the text. The young scholar's fingers were stained with ink as he plotted points along a crude map of the valley. A pattern was emerging, one that suggested the mining operations had inadvertently created channels through which ancient forces could now flow freely. The trading post's wooden walls creaked ominously as a cold wind swept through Virginia City, carrying with it the sound of distant chanting. Hannah, the post's proprietor, moved silently through the room, distributing coffee to the exhausted defenders. Her eyes kept darting to the windows, watching for her husband John, who led one of the patrol groups keeping the afflicted away from the river's edge. Rebecca arrived with news from the Blackfoot camps to the north. The few remaining tribal elders were gathering, preparing for a ceremony that might help restore the barriers, but they needed time. Time they weren't sure they had. The spirits that had broken free were growing stronger with each person who succumbed to their influence, and the corrupted waters were spreading downstream toward other settlements. Matthew pulled Grace aside, his voice low and grave. "There's something you need to see." He led her to the sheriff's office, where a map from the mining company's survey team was spread across his desk. The pattern of gold deposits matched perfectly with Andrew's markings of the sacred sites. "This isn't coincidence," Matthew said, tracing the lines with a calloused finger. The ancient ones knew exactly what they were protecting. Outside, the wind carried the first drops of an unnatural rain, droplets that seemed to glow with the same sickly light as the river. Those gathered in the trading post watched in horror as the water left faintly luminescent trails down the window panes. Time was running out, and the barrier between worlds grew thinner with each passing moment. The curse that the old Blackfoot shaman had warned about wasn't just a spiritual affliction. It was the unraveling of reality itself. Abigail, the town's schoolteacher, arrived with a group of children whose parents had succumbed to the madness. Their small faces were marked by fear and confusion as they huddled together in the trading post's back room. Grace found herself drawn to them, recognizing that their innocence might be the key to understanding the nature of the corruption. The children spoke of strange dreams and whispered songs that called to their parents, but somehow they remained immune to the influence that had claimed so many others. As night deepened, Matthew organized the remaining able-bodied men and women into shifts, knowing that sleep would make them vulnerable to the same forces that had claimed their neighbors. The trading post had become more than just a fortress. It was now the last bastion of sanity in a valley that was rapidly descending into chaos. And somewhere in the ancient writings and tribal wisdom, they had to find an answer before the madness spread beyond Virginia City to threaten settlements downstream. Sheriff Michael Wright stood at the edge of the churning river, watching as another bloated corpse was pulled from the raging waters. This was the fourth drowning in 2 weeks. All gold prospectors who'd ventured too close to the Forbidden Valley. The old Blackfoot shaman's warnings echoed in his mind as thunder rolled ominously across the dark Montana sky. The curse was taking its toll on Virginia City, and Michael knew in his bones that the worst was yet to come. Behind him, Andrew Harris, his deputy and childhood friend, carefully wrapped the body in a canvas sheet. "Another one from the Lewis mining camp," Andrew muttered grimly. "That makes 12 dead since they started digging in Thunder Valley. Natural causes or not, something ain't right about this, Michael." Rebecca Young, the town's school teacher and resident historian, approached with an ancient leather-bound journal clutched to her chest. Her usual pristine appearance was disheveled, dark circles beneath her eyes betraying sleepless nights spent researching the valley's dark history. "Sheriff, I found something in my grandfather's papers. The shaman wasn't the first to warn about this place." The trio gathered in Michael's office as Rebecca spread yellowed pages across his desk. They told a haunting tale. Nearly 50 years earlier, a Spanish expedition had encountered the same valley. Their entire party vanished, save one man who emerged babbling about spirits in the water that drove men to madness. The account matched perfectly with what the Blackfoot elder had told them about water spirits bound to sacred ground. Victoria Harris, Andrew's wife and the town's most skilled healer, burst through the door with urgent news. Another 3 miners had been brought to her clinic, raving mad and covered in self-inflicted wounds. "They keep screaming about voices in the water," she said, her hands trembling. "One of them, John King. He clawed his own eyes out, saying he couldn't bear to see the reflections anymore. As if nature itself conspired to punctuate Victoria's words, a bone-rattling tremor shook the building. Outside, the usually peaceful river churned violently, its waters taking on an unnatural golden hue. Michael watched in horror as massive whirlpools formed, their centers black as pitch. The curse was manifesting in ways none of them had imagined possible. David Lewis, the mining company's owner, stormed into the office demanding action. His once immaculate suit was mud-stained, his face haggard from sleepless nights, counting his dwindling workforce. "Right, you've got to get control of this situation. Those superstitious fools are abandoning the camps. We're sitting on a fortune in gold, and you're letting ghost stories run everyone off." Michael's response was cut short by the arrival of Hannah King, the widow of one of the first victims. She carried an ornate wooden box, its surface carved with symbols matching those in Rebecca's journal. "My husband found this in the valley before he died," she whispered. "There's something inside. Something that wants out." The box began to hum with an otherworldly resonance, and the office's oil lamps flickered wildly. Through the windows, they could see the river's golden glow intensifying, casting apocalyptic light across the panicked faces of townspeople gathering in the street. The curse was no longer content to claim its victims one by one. It was preparing for something far more catastrophic. Grace Wright, Michael's wife and the daughter of the town's founding family, arrived with news that would change everything. She'd been visiting her ailing grandmother, who finally revealed the truth about their family's connection to the valley. The Wrights hadn't founded Virginia City by chance. They'd been tasked with protecting the ancient seal that kept the water spirits bound. A seal that the mining operations had unknowingly breached. Michael felt the weight of generations settling on his shoulders as he realized his true purpose as sheriff wasn't to maintain law and order, but to protect an ancient pact. The badge he wore wasn't just a symbol of authority. It was a mark of guardianship passed down through his bloodline, though the meaning had been lost until now. The group gathered around Hannah's box as Rebecca translated the symbols using her grandfather's notes. They discovered that the water spirits weren't simply vengeful entities. They were guardians themselves, protecting something far more valuable than gold. Beneath the valley lay a gateway to a realm of pure spirit, and the mining operations were dangerously close to breaking through. Time seemed to slow as Michael made his decision. Against David Lewis's furious protests, he ordered the immediate evacuation of Virginia City. The curse wasn't just targeting miners. It was building toward a catastrophic release of power that would cleanse the valley of all human presence. They had hours, at most, to save as many lives as possible. As the townspeople fled, Michael and his closest allies prepared for their final stand. The box contained an ancient ritual that could restore the seal, but it required a sacrifice, a willing guardian to take the place of those who had been bound before. The choice was clear to Michael, though Grace's tears nearly broke his resolve. Thunder crashed and lightning split the sky as Michael began the ritual at the river's edge. The water spirits rose in towering columns of golden liquid, their forms both beautiful and terrifying. In that moment, as the fate of the valley hung in the balance, Michael Wright embraced his true legacy, not as a sheriff, but as a guardian of ancient powers that the modern world had forgotten. As Michael began the ancient ritual, the very earth seemed to tremble beneath their feet. Grace and the remaining townsfolk watched from the safety of higher ground as the sheriff stood knee-deep in the churning waters, his voice carrying ancient Blackfoot words that seemed to resonate with the storm itself. The box's contents, a mixture of sacred herbs, river stones, and what appeared to be human bone fragments, floated in a perfect circle around him. The golden water spirits twisted and writhed, their forms taking on aspects of great bears, wolves, and eagles, the totemic guardians of the valley. Through their translucent bodies, Michael could see the truth of what lay beneath. Not just gold, but a nexus of natural power that had kept the land in balance for millennia. The miners hadn't just disturbed the earth. They'd wounded something far more fundamental. Grace clutched Victoria's hand as they witnessed Michael's transformation. His features seemed to shift in the strange light, sometimes appearing as a young man, sometimes as an ancient warrior, as the spirits tested his worthiness. The box's final secret revealed itself. a small leather pouch containing the dust of every guardian who had come before, their essence preserved through countless generations. The storm intensified, and the ground split open near the mine entrances, golden light pouring forth like liquid fire. The few remaining buildings of Virginia City groaned and splintered, their foundations giving way as the earth rejected the very presence of the settlement. Michael's voice rose above the chaos, speaking words that felt older than the mountains themselves. Several of the water spirits surged forward, their golden forms wrapping around Michael like luminous serpents. Grace screamed and tried to run to him, but Victoria held her back, understanding that interference now would doom them all. The sheriff's body began to glow with the same otherworldly light as the spirits, his mortality slowly burning away in the crucible of ancient power. Deep beneath the earth, the original Guardians' remains stirred in their eternal rest. Their power, bound for centuries in sacred caves and hidden springs, recognized Michael's sacrifice and responded. The valley itself seemed to exhale, releasing decades of built-up tension and rage. The golden light pulsed once, twice, then exploded outward in a silent wave that knocked everyone to their knees. When the light faded, the storm had passed, and an eerie calm settled over the valley. Where Michael had stood, a new spring bubbled up through the soil, its waters clear but somehow luminescent in the growing dawn. The river, which had been violently churning moments before, now flowed with a peaceful purpose, as if guided by an invisible hand. Grace approached the spring, her heart both breaking and filling with a strange pride. She could feel Michael's presence in the water, in the wind, in the very stones beneath her feet. He hadn't died. He had become something more, something eternal. The valley had its guardian again, and the balance was restored. Victoria gathered the remaining sacred items, carefully wrapping the now empty box in a cloth marked with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. She understood that her role now was to preserve the truth of what had happened here, to ensure that future generations would remember the cost of disturbing ancient powers. In the weeks that followed, as Virginia City was abandoned to the elements, stories began to spread. Travelers spoke of strange lights in the valley at night, of waters that could heal the sick, of a presence that watched over those who passed through with respect but drove away those who came seeking riches. The curse had become a blessing, but only for those who understood its true nature. Grace remained in the area, building a small homestead near the new spring. She became the valley's unofficial keeper, teaching her children and grandchildren the truth about their father's sacrifice and the importance of maintaining harmony with the land. The Blackfoot elders recognized her role and shared more of their ancient knowledge, ensuring that the Guardian's legacy would continue through blood and spirit alike. Years later, when other towns attempted to establish mining operations in the valley, they found their efforts mysteriously thwarted. Equipment failed, supplies vanished, and workers reported dreams of a stern-faced lawman who warned them away. The valley had found its protector, and Michael Wright's sacrifice ensured that the balance would be maintained for generations to come. Sheriff Michael Lewis stood at the edge of the cursed valley, watching as the storm clouds gathered ominously above Virginia City. The past month's devastation had taken its toll. Mine collapses, flash floods, and an inexplicable madness that had driven several settlers to wander into the wilderness, never to return. The Blackfoot shaman's warnings echoed in his mind as thunder rolled across the darkening sky. Rebecca Harris clutched her father's journal, its pages filled with frantic scribblings about ancient spirits and a gold vein that should have remained untouched. John Harris had been the first to discover the gold and the first to succumb to the valley's influence. His final entries spoke of shadowy figures that danced at the edge of his vision and whispers that called him deeper into the mines. Andrew Wright, the town's doctor, had documented the spreading affliction with clinical precision. What began as headaches and vivid dreams evolved into violent episodes and an obsession with the deep caves that honeycombed the valley walls. He'd watched helplessly as his wife Victoria descended into the same madness, her once gentle nature twisted by whatever force dwelled in the cursed ground. The turning point came when young David King, barely 12 years old, emerged from the mines speaking the ancient Blackfoot tongue, a language he'd never learned. His mother Grace had brought him to Sheriff Lewis in tears, describing how the boy would spend hours conversing with unseen entities in the shadows of their home. Matthew Young, the town's historian, had pieced together the valley's bloody past. Long before the gold rush, the area had been a sacred burial ground, where Blackfoot shamans conducted rituals to keep ancient spirits bound beneath the earth. The mining operations had disturbed these bonds, releasing something that had slumbered for centuries. Hannah Wright, Andrew's daughter, proved crucial in understanding the curse's nature. Her grandmother had been Blackfoot, and through her teachings, Hannah recognized the signs. The valley wasn't just cursed, it was awakening. The gold deposits were like chains, binding powerful entities that predated human settlement in the region. Sheriff Lewis organized a desperate expedition into the deepest mine shaft, guided by Hannah's knowledge of Blackfoot lore. They brought with them artifacts and totems gathered from surrounding tribes, following the shaman's instructions for a binding ritual that might restore the ancient seals. The ceremony began at midnight, as storm winds howled through the valley. Rebecca Harris read from her father's journal, combining his observations with Hannah's traditional knowledge. The cave walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light as they worked to repair the spiritual barriers that generations of mining had destroyed. Deep in the earth, they discovered a chamber filled with centuries-old pictographs, depicting the original binding ritual. The spirits manifested around them, not as the malevolent forces they'd feared, but as ancient guardians whose purpose had been to protect the land from exploitation. Through Hannah's interpretation, they learned the true nature of the valley's power. The resolution came not through conflict, but understanding. The surviving settlers of Virginia City made a pact with the ancient spirits, mediated by Hannah and the Blackfoot shaman. The mines would be sealed, the gold left untouched, and the valley returned to its original purpose as a sacred site. The madness lifted gradually from those afflicted, though some, like Victoria Wright, would carry the memory of their experiences for the rest of their lives. David King retained his mysterious connection to the Blackfoot language, becoming a bridge between the two cultures that would share the valley's guardianship. Sheriff Lewis documented everything in the town records, ensuring that future generations would understand the true value of the valley lay not in its gold, but in its role as a boundary between worlds. The town relocated to safer ground, leaving the original settlement as a monument to the consequences of disregarding ancient warnings. Rebecca Harris established a school where both settler and Blackfoot children could learn each other's traditions, with Hannah Wright serving as its first teacher. The valley became a place of learning rather than exploitation. Its dark history transformed into a lesson about respect for the land and its original custodians. Years later, Michael Lewis would often stand at his favorite viewpoint, watching the sunset behind the valley's ridges. The old mines had been reclaimed by nature, their entrances covered by thick vegetation. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he could still hear the whispers of the ancient spirits, no longer threatening, but reminiscent of a time when the land itself had taught them all a profound lesson about greed, respect, and the true meaning of legacy. As winter settled over the valley years later, Michael Lewis found himself documenting the remarkable transformation that had taken place. The trading post he'd established along the river had become a vital connection between Virginia City and the Blackfoot settlements, fostering not just commerce but genuine understanding between the communities. The old sheriff's weathered journal, filled with accounts of those haunted days, had become required reading at Rebecca's school. Hannah Wright's classes now included lessons on traditional Blackfoot medicine, taught by the very shamans who had once warned of the curse. The children would gather medicinal herbs along the riverbank, learning the delicate balance between taking from the land and giving back. Even the most skeptical of the original settlers had come to appreciate the wisdom in these ancient practices, especially after witnessing the valley's regeneration. Victoria, the daughter of one of the miners who'd perished during the darkness, had grown into a respected interpreter between the communities. She'd learned the Blackfoot language from the elders and helped establish a council where both settlers and tribal leaders could address common concerns. The gold that had once driven men mad now seemed a paltry treasure compared to the wealth of knowledge being preserved and shared. Along the river, new trading routes flourished, connecting Laredo to the southern settlements and Santa Fe to the northern territories. But unlike the frenzied gold rush days, this commerce followed the ancient rhythms of the land. The traders learned to read the water levels, respect the seasonal changes, and honor the spiritual significance of certain places marked by the Blackfoot people. In Amarillo, where many of the surviving miners had relocated, the stories of the cursed valley had taken on an almost mythical quality. But those who lived near the old settlement knew the truth was far more nuanced. The land hadn't been cursed so much as it had been defending itself, teaching a harsh but necessary lesson about the consequences of unchecked greed. David, the youngest son of the original settlers, had grown up straddling both worlds. He'd learned to track game from Blackfoot hunters and navigate the river traders' routes with equal skill. His marriage to Grace, a Blackfoot healer's daughter, symbolized the new harmony that had emerged from the chaos of those earlier days. Their children played in the same valleys where spirits had once raged, their laughter a healing balm for old wounds. The annual gathering at the river crossing became a celebration of this hard-won peace. Traders from all directions would converge, bringing not just goods but stories, songs, and traditions to share. The old mining equipment, now rust-covered relics half buried in the earth, served as silent reminders of how close they'd come to destroying something precious and irreplaceable. Andrew, who'd lost his brother in the mine collapse, found unexpected solace in helping maintain the sacred sites identified by the Blackfoot elders. He'd learned their stories, understood their significance, and became one of the most vocal advocates for preserving both the land and its history. His own children grew up knowing both the dangers of forgetting the past and the importance of building a better future. As Michael completed his chronicles, he realized that the true gold of the valley had never been the kind that could be mined. It lay in the wisdom of the land itself, in the stories passed down through generations, and in the delicate balance between progress and preservation. The trading posts along the river now served as gathering places where different cultures could meet, learn, and grow together. The legacy of those dark days had transformed into something bright and enduring. The children who attended Rebecca's school would carry forward a different kind of wealth, the understanding that the land was not just a resource to be exploited, but a living entity that demanded respect and reciprocity. The spirits of the valley, once vengeful, now seemed to watch over their descendants with quiet approval, guardians of a peace that had been earned through hardship and wisdom. As the seasons turned, the valley flourished under its new stewardship. Michael's chronicles became a cornerstone of local governance, consulted whenever development threatened to overshadow preservation. The trading posts that dotted the riverbanks evolved into centers of cultural exchange, where Blackfoot wisdom merged with settler innovation, creating something entirely new and sustainable. Rebecca's school grew beyond its humble beginnings, incorporating both traditional knowledge and modern education. She often invited Blackfoot elders to share their stories, while Hannah, now a respected healer, taught both indigenous medicine and Western medical practices. The children learned to read the land as well as their books, understanding weather patterns and natural cycles that their predecessors had ignored to their peril. In Virginia City, the old sheriff's office where the investigation began had been transformed into a museum. Andrew, though retired, still served as its curator, ensuring that the dark days of the curse were never forgotten.